Hello. Hi, everybody. Welcome today to the final Community Resilience seminar for the remainder of this year. We're really excited to bring a very timely topic on the impact of changing seasonality on communities across North America. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers for you today. We're really excited about this webinar. And first, we're going to start with some technical matters. So to turn on interpretation today, please look at the bottom of your Zoom screen. There will be a button that says More, and it has a circle with three dots. If you click on that, then you'll have an option to choose your interpretation language. So if you are listening in English, please press English. And I'll turn it over to my colleague, Karina, to also explain.
Gracias, Micaela.
Thank you, Michaela.
Bueno, primero que nada, me
First of all,
gustaría darle la
I would
bienvenida
like
a
to
todas las
welcome
personas que nos acompañan
everyone who
hoy en
has
este
joined us
webinario
today in this
sobre el
final
impacto de la
webinar
variación
on
estacional en las
the
comunidades de
impact
América del
on
Norte. Mi nombre es Karina Morales y soy
seasonality
parte del
change
equipo de
in
grupos
North
consultivos y
American communities.
participación
I am
si
part
aún
of
no escuchan la
advisory
interpretación en su
groups
idioma
and
de
public
preferencia,
participation. If
pueden
you
hacer
do
clic
not
en el
listen
icono de globo
to your
terráqueo
language
o
of
un
preference,
círculo
you
con
can
tres
click
puntos
on
en
the
la
globe
esquina
icon
derecha
on
inferior
the
de su
three
pantalla.
dots
Al
that you have
seleccionar
on the
más,
bottom of your
verán los
screen. When
tres
you select
idiomas
more, you
disponibles.
will see the
Gracias.
three languages available. Please select the one of your preference. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Karina. And also, let me not forget to introduce myself. My name is Micaela Martinez, and I'm the Community Resilience Officer at the Commission. And so to get us started today and thinking about the topic of seasonality, we have a poll to share with you. And so our team has brought up the poll, and the poll question is, what comes to mind when you think about changing seasonality, and what changes in seasonal patterns have you experienced in your local area? Oh, here we go. What changes in seasonal patterns have you experienced in your local community? And I'll read out some of the answers in English, and Karina will read them in Spanish. So one answer we have is later and less snow, earlier and longer hot weather. Another answer is warmer, longer summers, increased number of heat waves. Less snow, earlier and drier weather. Very cold winter spells, grass fires, increasing fire and floods, increasing insurance costs. Warmer fall temperatures leads to lakes/rivers freezing later in the season, has impacts on ice roads. Do you want to read some in Spanish, Karina?
Sí, gracias, Micaela. Tenemos eventos extremos, lluvias
Ex,
torrenciales y
ex,
sequías
extreme
inesperadas.
weather events,
También variación de
droughts,
temperatura o
unexpected droughts,
precipitación, aparición
increase
de
on
enfermedades
temperature and
tropicales en
rainfall,
zonas templadas,
tropical
gasto en
diseases
enfermedades.
in temperate weather, and also more diseases.
Great. And I also see another hotter and drier weather. Number of Canada geese returning each year are declining. So we also see some impact on wildlife as well. Wonderful. Thank you so much. So it looks like, oh, we have one more in Spanish. I think it was
Sí,
extreme climate.
sí, correcto.
Okay, wonderful. So I think that all got us considering the impacts that we are starting to see in our local communities. And so now we're going to turn it over to our speakers. Each speaker will introduce themselves and talk about the changing seasonality in the ecosystems and communities where they work. And so first, over to Brendan Kelly. Brendan, feel free to share your screen.
Okay.
And while Brendan is sharing his screen, please note that for all of the speakers, their bios are available on the event page on the CEC website, which I'll drop in the chat shortly.
You're
When,
seeing my title slide?
yes, we
Great.
are.
Thank you, Michaela. I'm the chief scientist for the International Arctic Research Center, University of Alaska Fairbanks. One of my duties there is to direct a multidisciplinary, multicultural study of environmental change in the Arctic, in which we are co-producing understanding of the drivers and consequences for people of the changing Arctic environment. I'm going to focus on sea ice because it's a really dominant feature of the Arctic. Um, and first thing you need to understand is that sea ice is a continental-sized habitat on which Yupik and Inupiaq and other indigenous people depend and have for thousands of years. Another thing you need to understand about Arctic sea ice is that the habitat itself changes dramatically seasonally, and it changes in size seasonally. So, for example, uh, in the peak extent of sea ice in March in 1979, it covered 16 million square kilometers, uh, versus in September at its minimum, it was only half of that, less than 8 million square kilometers. But that habitat is also, in addition to seasonal changes, is undergoing secular change. As the climate warms, the amount of ice in winter and summer is getting less and less. So here you see September 2024, the minimum for that year. The gold line there showing you the median extent of sea ice between 1981 and 2010. So you can imagine that there were years that were even smaller than this. 2007, 2012, we had very, very little summer sea ice. The average loss in summer months has been 73,000 square kilometers per year since 1979. In winter, it's been somewhat less, 31,000 square kilometers per year lost since 1979. I'm going to talk primarily about the marine mammals that people in the region depend on. These are marine mammals that are adapted to seasonal sea ice. I'm going to focus on two species in particular, but first I want to step back and just tell you a little bit about um, how it is that marine mammals have come to occupy ice-covered waters. Um, and I'm focusing here on the pinnipeds, the seals, sea lions, and walruses. They are evolved from terrestrial carnivores who reinvaded the ocean maybe 30 million years ago. And in doing so, they had to make a trade-off. They're air breathing, so they have to come to the surface, but their food's under the surface. So they're diving. And that means that they either reproduce in the water as the whales do, or they still come out on land as the pinnipeds do. And this has involved an important trade-off. So I've plotted the number of species on the vertical axis against the latitude on the horizontal axis. The take home here is unlike most taxa, pinnipeds have their greatest diversity in the high latitudes instead of the low latitudes. And in fact, for pinnipeds, their greatest diversities in both the northern and southern hemisphere are those latitudes to which seasonal sea ice extends. So let's see what that means in terms of Arctic pinnipeds. I'm going to start with walruses, the largest Arctic pinniped. They depend on fairly heavy ice to support their great weight, especially since they tend to come out of the water in large groups. They mate on moving ice, the pack ice of the Bering Sea in the winter months, and then they give birth to their calves while migrating north in the spring. The females and calves go out of the north of the Bering Sea into the Chukchi Sea, where they stay with the ice for the summer before returning again to the Bering Sea in the fall time. So I want to give you a cartoon view of some of the dynamics of sea ice that are important to people. And so you can see Alaska there on the right, Chukotka on the left, and the Bering Sea is this region here. Are you seeing my cursor? And the Chukchi is the sea up here. So one of the important things, I mean, if you're an air-breathing mammal occupying ice, you need access to air. And so one of the things that happens seasonally is that we get the opening of open water on the south side of Polynias and islands. And this is because in the wintertime, the prevailing wind is out of the northeast and it pushes the ice off of those shorelines. Um, Another thing important, another feature important for air-breathing mammals is, I've indicated in these little blue lines up here, is where the ice is pushed through narrow constrictions like Bering Strait here or between St. Lawrence Island and Chukotka, it cracks and fractures. And so there are reliably fractures and cracks that provide access to air. And then finally, there's this lead system. And the lead is a linear opening that typically forms where the shore fast ice, the ice that isn't moving because it's connected to shore, is adjacent to the moving offshore ice. That lead system turns out to be an important migration corridor for whales, walruses, and seals, all of whom are dependent, are important to indigenous peoples. So if we then look at the distribution of the oldest Yupik and Inupiaq sites in Western Alaska and Chukotka, you see that they are all concentrated on those places where there's access to marine mammals because of Polynyia or a lead. Unfortunately, and I guess the other thing I should say is the fact that those oldest sites are there suggests strongly that these features in the ice have been around for at least 10,000 years. But the future is going to be different. So Yupik and Inupiaq and the Bering and Chukchi areas uh, are walrus hunters, whale hunters, seal hunters, and in the thousands of years they've occupied the region, they've developed a deep knowledge of sea ice and the animals that inhabit it. So last year, the search program co-produced a paper on the changing access hunters have to walruses as the climate changes. We're working on a longer paper now that's broader in terms of other subsistence species. The changing seasonality of ice means, for example, that walruses, and this is one of our conclusions from our co-produced paper, walruses now migrate past St. Lawrence Island in the northern Bering Sea earlier and faster than they ever have before. Now hunters are, instead of traveling a few miles from their island, they're traveling up to 100 miles in small boats to harvest these large animals. It's a very dangerous enterprise, and the future looks like it's going to be more challenging. So here from our paper is a figure that I'll need to interpret for you here a bit. Let me move this out of the way. So if we look at the left panel, this is St. Lawrence Island in the northern Bering Sea. What we've plotted is on the horizontal axis, month of the year, on the vertical axis, the year from 1850 to 2100. And we're showing you open water in dark blue and solid ice in the lightest color. We Between 1850 and 2020, we reconstructed ice conditions from ship logs and from indigenous knowledge. And from 2020 to 2100, we modeled it. with climate models. Take home here is for St. Lawrence Island, more longer and longer and longer open water seasons by the end of the century, maybe year round. That means that hunting ice-associated mammals is not going to be possible anymore. The other two communities are further north, and I'm not going to spend time on them right now. Another thing to know about walruses is they're benthic feeders, and a seasonal change in the past, the summer months, as I said, the females and the young are on the ice in the Chukchi Sea. That yellow line there is showing you the average ice edge in the summer months in recent decades, or past decades, I should say. But now you see the ice is quite a bit north of that and quite a bit north of the continental shelf. So that black water is too deep for walruses to feed. So what's happened is the nursing habitat on the ice has been decoupled from the adult feeding habitat, which is over the continental shelf. The consequences is walruses are now spending more time in these large terrestrial haul-outs where they're at greater risk of stampedes, fatal stampedes, increased risk of predation, and they're farther from their benthic food sources. Let me turn to the smallest of the Arctic pinnipeds, the ring seals. They have a different strategy for uh, having access to air in an ice habitat rather than, they maintain breathing holes through the ice, which they abrade with their claws, um, and hence are less dependent on seasonal migrations to stay where there's open water. Their strategy for predator avoidance, instead of grouping like walruses, they spread out and they rely on concealing themselves under the ice and under the snow because they maintain access to those breathing holes, as I said, and excavate snow caves above them. And it's in those caves that the young are born. The snow protects them to some extent from predators, and it certainly insulates the pups that otherwise wouldn't be able to survive the extreme temperatures. So the adult female will leave the lair, that snow cave, to feed herself under the ice. They feed on fish and plankton, and then she'll return to that lair to provision the pup with a very rich milk. Um, the pup, as I think I said, spend 2 to 3 months, the first 2 to 3 months of their life inside of these snow caves. So just to give you a sense of the thermal advantage of these layers, here I've plotted some data on temperature on the vertical axis over 4 days in May on the horizontal axis. And you see in red the temperature inside of the layer, and in blue the temperature outside of the layer. Clearly, the layer is staying much warmer, above -5 degrees, despite severe fluctuations in external temperature. When a seal comes into the layer, its body heat further increases the temperature in that layer, again, independent of what's happening outside the layer. And then when the seal leaves, the temperature goes back, but it's always staying above -5 degrees, well within the thermal range of thermal neutrality for the seals.
And Brendan, just to let you know, you have 2 more minutes.
Okay, so take home here is that if we look at snow on ice in the end of the last century and the projected and the end of the current century, there will be 70% less habitat in terms of snow depths suitable for raising ring seal pups. This is very important to the Inuit. The Inuit occupation of the Arctic depended heavily on ring seals initially. The Sikumiut developed very elaborate technical and behavioral adaptations to occupying this habitat, and they've been very generous in sharing their knowledge and methods, including using dogs to find seal holes, with me and other researchers. The dog is found where sniffed where a seal is breathing. The hunter has probed a hole, and now he's put a little device that'll show him when a seal is breathing. Finally, I'll leave with a little note about seasonality from a Yupik elder.
When the ice come in, it becomes very, very cold. In fact, in our language, when is the winter? When will it be winter? When will winter come in? When the ice come in, winter began, not December 21. No winter now.
The environment is changing more rapidly.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Brendan. And then we would like to welcome our next speaker, Carolina, if you would like to turn on your video and share your slides. And while Carolina is launching her slides, just wanted to note to everybody that please add questions for the speakers into the Q&A box. It should be at the bottom of your screen, and we'll have time for a panel discussion at the end when the speakers will answer your questions. Thank you.
Buenos días a todos, buenas tardes, buenos
Hello,
días.
good afternoon,
Espero
everyone.
que puedan ver bien
I
la
hope you can
presentación.
see the screen
Supongo que sí,
well.
¿verdad?
I
Yes,
hope you can see it.
Carolina, we can see your slides, but we can't see you. I think your camera might be off.
Okay, should I try to? Okay,
At the bottom of your
but I
screen, there should be a button on the Zoom screen that says video. And if you click that, that will turn your video on.
yeah,
All
I
right.
think.
Okay,
Now?
great. Yes, perfect. And then you can share your
Okay.
slides again.
Okay, I will share. Mhm. Mhm. So now I will start. So as you can see, como pueden ver, mi nombre es Carolina
As you can
Camacho.
see, my
Trabajo en
name
la
is Carolina
Universidad
Camacho, and I
Lincoln
work
en
in
Reino
the
Unido, en la
Lincoln
Escuela de
University
Tecnologías
in UK
Agroalimentarias
in
y
the
Food
School of
Manufacturing.
Agri-Food Technologies and Food Manufacturing.
Mi trabajo con
My
el maíz y
work
la milpa,
with
digamos que tengo más de
maize and
25 años.
cornfield. I have been
Tuve
working
la
in maize and
fortuna de
cornfield for
empezar mi
more than
carrera
24
profesional
years.
como agronomía
I
trabajando con
started
comunidades de
working
diversidad de maíz con
with
comunidades
different
mayas de la península de
Mayan
Yucatán,
communities in the
particularmente el oriente de
Yucatan
Yucatán
Peninsula,
y la
especially
zona
in the west
de
of
Yaxcabá.
Yucatan in
Y en
Yaxcabá
el
zone.
proceso de
And
aprender
in the
sobre
process
variedades
of
de maíz y
learning
sobre
about a
diversidad de maíz,
variety of mazes
frijoles y de calabaza,
and
pude
beans and
interactuar
pumpkins,
mucho
I was able to
con
interact
los
a lot
milperos,
with
las familias
the
milperas que había ahí.
cornfield
Y además de
owners and
aprender sobre
cornfield
la diversidad, pude
families
aprender sobre
over there, and I
costumbres
was
como
able to
rituales,
learn
rituales
about
para la
diversity and
petición de
rituals
lluvias, como
to
es
ask
el
for
chapchac,
rain, such as
y
chapchak, and
otros métodos para
some
pronosticar
other
lluvias, como es
methods
el
to
sorquín, del
forecast
que voy a
rain,
hablar.
such as a shortkin, which is the
He
one I'm going to be
podido,
speaking
a lo
about.
largo de mi carrera
Over
profesional,
my
trabajar y
career,
estudiar maíz y
I have
milpa.
been able to
Hemos
study
sido
the maize and
afortunados
the
solamente para
cornfield,
aprender
and I
algo
have
sobre
been
la
lucky
el
not only
gobierno
to understand and work with
mayas de la península de Yucatán, sino
Mayans
también con
from
mayas
the
locales de
Yucatan
la zona
Peninsula, but from other
salvaje donde
with
me
other
encuentro.
Mayans from
Estoy
the
trabajando con mayas
forest
de
and with
Guatemala.
Mayans from Guatemala too.
La milpa es un sistema
And
muy importante, no
cornfield
solamente
is
en
a very
México, sino
important
en todo el
system, not
mundo.
only in
Y es
Mexico,
una
but around the
vivencia
world.
en
And
México, pero
in
también en
Mexico,
Estados
it's
Unidos y
important,
Canadá,
but
en la
also in
cordillera.
US and Canada.
Y es un sistema que se basa mucho en
And
la
it is a
agricultura de
system
temporada,
based
porque
on
como
the
podemos ver,
seasonality um,
cubre gran parte de la superficie.
rain-fed agriculture
Es la
that
agricultura más común, ya que
which is the
ocupa
most
el
common
80%
agriculture
de la
because it covers
superficie
80%
global,
of the
produciendo
global
alrededor del
surface,
50 al
producing 50 to 60% of food around the world. And it is an agriculture that it has been documented. It has been affected by the climate change. In particular, the agriculture that is practiced traditionally by indigenous communities and small producers are the ones that will have more uh, impact. And this agriculture is not a small agriculture. If you look at the statistics, it covers 11% of the total land, usable land, covering a recollection in comparison with modern agriculture, which with more farmers, 31% of those farmers produced 40% of food compared to farmers, traditional farmers that produce only 30% of food, and great part of those foods are industrial compared to a traditional farmers that have more diversity, that bring more diversity to our diet. So the message here is that we're not talking about an agriculture with few relevance. It is quite relevant that it's been affected. This is due to climate change and especially because of seasonality. But how has this been? How has the impact been? Because of intense rain, with more wind and storms. So, in a way or another, we're speaking about a problem that is bigger than will also impact the traditional agriculture. Now, I will focus on the cornfield system. The milpa term or cornfield term is a term quite used coming from and comes from Nahuatl, which is a language spoken in the middle of Mexico. It's always been associated with maize agriculture in US and Canada. As I have said, this is known as the Three Sisters because in the land plot scale, maize is cultivated with squashes and maize. This system is also this cornfield system is also used in Yucatan, and this system in the scientific literature has been documented that in a period of 100 years, well managed, you can renew a rainforest. So with this, we're speaking about a cornfield as a system, ecological system for tropical forest or rainforest, and in another scale, we can speak as cornfields as a way of living of communities, indigenous communities at different parts of Mesoamerica, but of North America too. So that's why we have different definitions. The ecological space acknowledges the association of this type of agriculture, but there are some other definitions that cover the aspect of reproducing not only a way of living from a social economic aspect, but also from a cultural side. And that has been acknowledged actually by the World Agriculture Organization through by providing in 2022 in 2022 acknowledging that this is a World Heritage system, especially the Yucatan's cornfield, and I will focus on that mainly. But cornfield that covers North America is a system while wide known given its biocultural value. In Maya cornfield, and I'm not only referring to the Yucatan Peninsula, but also the part covering Yucatan and Chiapas, has always been a very important system, and the weather has always been a fundamental matter. In the pre-Columbian stage or age, it was known that priests were the ones that defined their agricultural cycles, and through temples and architecture on that zones that we call now archaeological sites, but where they used to practice their rituals, they forecasted how the agricultural cycle was going to be, and that was communicated to people in the cornfield. And the weather has been used as a factor that collapsed. Sorry, it has been referred as a factor that collapsed Mayan culture, especially because of drought that affected people's life. And it's been referred that the heavy rainstorms during 1847 and 1901, when there was a war of a major indigenous people against people from Yucatan Peninsula, that stopped the capture of Merida to plant their cornfields. Because people go to war instead of cultivating the cornfield. So why is the culture in, connected? In a study in 2016 to 2019, we had many different interaction spaces with the Mayan communities from Campeche, Yucatan, and Quintana Roo. And many times they talk about the cornfield problems given the seasonality variety, and also they mentioned that the milpa or the cornfield of their dreams was a cornfield with a good rainfall or irrigation. It was when we talked about sustainability, they referred that the cornfield should be a system that was able to face climate change, and within the elements that they considered critical for sustainability of the system, the fact of having a method that could forecast seasonality or weather variability was something that were very important, were things that were very important and critical for sustainability of the system. And that's because currently the cornfield is affected by many different events, such as hurricanes that have always been a characteristic of the Yucatan Peninsula. And even Maya culture, it speaks about a dual element of hurricanes that could bring disaster, but it also as a hurricanes as an important element to renew the forest, because hurricanes such as in the Milton hurricane did not affect it, but there have been other hurricanes that have made lots of disasters. But with the climate change and with rainforest, they have faced other problems such as wildlife animals attacking the cornfield. Given that cornfields are in rainforest, it is easy for in during drought times to for animals to seek for food on those cornfields. In most of Mexico, especially in the Yucatan Peninsula this year, had lots of drought and has was affected so much by the drought. So the climate change, the weather, and all of these elements that I just mentioned affect the cornfield practices. What has been done with that? And there is a huge amount of traditional knowledge. As I was mentioning, the knowledge about the forecast regarding how the agricultural cycle was going to be was only practiced by the Mayan priests, but when the Maya culture collapsed, the priests were lost and this knowledge was lost too. So when there was when there was an encounter with the European um, culture, Uh, Practices change with cabañuelas, and this is used to predict or forecast the agricultural cycle. In Maya, it is called shokin, and it is practiced a lot by collectives such as shokin, in which during the first month of January they forecast how the days will be, if it is going to be a sunny day, cloudy day, if there will be rain, wind, fog, etc. And every day they have a forecast over 31 days. So at the beginning, they count from January 1st will represent January up to the 12th that represents December. And then they start counting from December to January. And so the last 6 days, which is the 30, is a morning and afternoon. So morning is January, afternoon is February, and that's how they forecast up to December. And the last year of the month, it is a forecast for all year. This is one of the schemes that they practice, and there is people that count it or that forecast it differently. But with this, they can know how the agricultural months will be. This forecast is not the only thing they do. They also use meteorological events indicators such as a tree flourishing in order to identify when the um, weather variation will get. Is We have also the Calandria nest and the behavior of insects. Let them know how the weather will be, as well as the auras, which are events related to the sky and how the sky behaves related to that. And that plays an important role, but something that is also very important in terms of forecast and getting ready to the agricultural station or season are rituals to make sure that there will be a good agriculture. One of the most important rituals is chak chak, to ask for rain. It is a ritual to ask the chak, the god of rain, to rain, and this is practiced in different entities of this group that are part of this group or involved in spreading the rain in agricultural lands. People ask to have a good rain, and this idea is very associated to rituals. When we carry out the study in that year, we in the conversational space tried to talk to the traditional knowledge and to talk to the scientific knowledge, and for that to prepare in a better way the Mayas cornfield farmers so they could make better decisions when to harvest or to know when to get prepared for drought. I mean, that to have a better rainy season. And as part of these results, we talked about having actions in the prediction spaces by using traditional knowledge methods, but also taking advantage of the forecast knowledge from the meteorological Mexican system, but also the rituals to be part of that preparation to forecast.
Carolina, apologies to interrupt, but one more minute. Thank you.
There were also actions related to adaptation that were related to agronomic matters such as changes of planting dates, and also it considered the crop and variety diversification and the way to manage soil and water, which is very important. We also talked about mitigation actions such as risk management, as well as livelihood diversification, and, as I said before, risk sharing. One of the most important elements that we reflected on our articles is that the climate is a very important example of a for mayas from Yucatan cases of injustice at different scales because there haven't been projects and sometimes there's no space to acknowledge, for instance, the role of rituals in their practices for in cornfields, beyond considering the cultural element or the common cultural element as an element that gives them a better possibility for cornfields. And another injustice element is how these voices and these collectives, Mayan and indigenous collectives, to continue that keep on practicing shocking to be supported in political spaces where agricultural cycles decisions are made.
Something that came out of these conversations and has to do with distributed justice. It is a request from the farmers, from the corn farmers. We take the risk to cultivate, but when there is a disaster, there are no resources to help us. So we have to talk about support structures for weather events for small producers. There's a lack of these programs and no public policies for this. Climate change involves many challenges, and this is an additional challenge to the corn farmers. This has many challenges, intergenerational challenges. The question is always there. Can the milpa or cornfield be part of the livelihood of the indigenous peoples in the future? There are also changes of generational behavior, and we can create a stronger co-design program and including sharing knowledge. Thank you.
Gracias, Carolina. And next we will turn it over to Amber Smith. And please remember to drop your questions in the Q&A box. Great. And Amber, feel free to share your screen.
Good morning and good afternoon for some of you. My name is Amber Smith. I am a rancher based in Eastern Montana. I am also the co-executive director of Women in Ranching, which is a nonprofit supporting women on the land and growing their skills and growing their businesses and creating networks of opportunity. So when I was thinking about what we're seeing on the land across the many people who are showing up at Women in Ranching, I wanted to first start by sharing my own story of climate change and its impacts on the land and the businesses. In 2017, our community faced the Lodgepole Fire Complex, which was the largest fire in the state of Montana, encompassed over 270,000 acres. Our community lost over 16 homes during that fire. And it was at a point where the smoke was so heavy, it was hard for us to see. It was hard for people to locate their animals. Folks were driving and cutting fences. They were riding horses and cutting fences, trying to help their animals get out of harm's way. And while fire has always been a part of this landscape, fire has been suppressed since colonization. And in that suppression, our fires are burning hotter and they're more damaging to the soil surface. Our fires are burning longer and faster, and it has a major impact not only on the livelihoods of the wildlife on the land, but also the folks who are raising plants and animals for food. And for any of you who have faced these types of situations, I also know the mental health in our community was in great decline across that season. And you could feel a palpable depression as you drove into town for groceries and bringing kids to their, summer school programs. And so I share that story because I would like to share some of the ways that I see women addressing these problems in their communities. And so when we're thinking about fire, I think about Erica Mannix and Mannix Family Ranch in Helmville, Montana, where they are working with government organizations, non-government organizations, community organizations, with their neighbors to do prescribed burns on the landscape. And so on their ranch, they have trees that are encroaching down into the grasslands, and they're using prescribed fire to open that land back up to its more natural state, which is benefiting their cattle grazing operation. It also puts the land back into health in a way that the songbirds and other animals that benefit from a more open landscape are able to participate fully how they always have. And in our community and a lot of communities around the West, people are just very scared of fire. And so even the idea of prescribed fire, sometimes they do go out of control. And so it takes really good relationships with your neighbors and really good relationships with organizations who are willing to step up and educate and help keep things in a controlled fashion. So something else that we have seen as an impact on our land is as our weather here in the north is becoming more dry for increasing periods of time, we're seeing the ephemeral streams and the small water holes that normally would have lasted through the end of June or into July. Sometimes they don't come into existence at all, which means our frogs and toads and birds are being impacted by that. And our land base is home to sage grouse. And while sage grouse need the sagebrush, which we have plenty of, they also need low-lying wetlands. They need access to many grasses and many bugs. And so one of the ways that we're trying on our landscape to increase the water holding capacity is through beaver dam analogs. And so we are using tree cuttings, we're using rocks, sometimes we use sagebrush, and we're building small dams similar to what beavers would have built in order when the rains do come and the water comes rushing through the coulees, that water hits those dams and then stays in place longer. And as that takes place, the sagebrush that has encroached into the low-lying areas is flooded out. Grasses are able to come back. And we had a group touring the ranch 2 summers ago where we went down to the beaver dam analogs and we're describing why it's so important to the sage grouse. And one of our dogs ran through and kicked about 16 sage grouse up out of those wet areas. And so a lot of times in our communities, we have technological solutions that are very expensive, such as water pipeline to bring more water to the land. And even if you don't have access to those things through government support, there are much smaller ways that you're able to tend the land as we're facing climatic changes. Outside of the Mannix family, I would like to bring forward Tutta Cruz. She's based in New Mexico at Ute Creek Cattle Company. And one of the low-tech options that she has employed in New Mexico is black plastic shade balls that sit on the surface of their cattle's drinking water. And that has highly reduced evaporation out of their water tanks. And so all of this water, as they increased pipelines on the ranch and they were pulling water up from the ground, so much of it was being lost to evaporation. And so she worked with a company to create these black plastic shade balls to put on the surface of all of their water tanks, creating barriers to block sunlight and dramatically lowering water loss due to evaporation. That's a really great example of a woman on the land thinking creatively, partnering with an outside business to design something that would work for her operation. Another rancher I would like to bring forward is Ariel Greenwood. She is also based in New Mexico. And for those of you living in the Southwest, I know that you know so much better than myself that the monsoon seasons are changing, that when water does come, it's coming harder and faster after extended periods of drought. And so what they were seeing on their landscape is a lot of erosion as those waters came so quickly onto the land and wiping out the soil that they're working to build as they rotationally graze their cattle. And so Ariel is spending time walking their landscape and building small rock dams that helps, again, slow the water down, hold it on the soil surface longer, which builds up those riparian areas. So you're seeing brush and grasses come back to places that were just really big washes from the water running so quickly. And while that does take time, it takes physical labor, it takes the ability to look at the land and see where the erosion is occurring, there isn't an external cost associated to taking care of the land in that way. And all of these opportunities are ways that folks are recognizing and acknowledging that if we're not caring for the land as our climate is changing, in 7 years, we won't be in business. In 10 years, we won't be in business. And both ranchers and farmers typically have a really strong desire to see multi-generation businesses. And so I very often hear, we can't do things how our grandfather did, or we can't do things how our grandmother did, because unfortunately the change is happening. And so if we want to be in existence on the land, if we want to continue providing nutrient dense animal proteins in our communities, we're going to have to adapt and start trialing things that look a lot different than folks were doing 25, 50, 75 years ago. I really look forward to questions at the end of this discussion. And for any of you who enjoy doing some Google searches, check out Erica Mannix at Helmville, Montana, Tutta Cruz on Ute Creek Cattle Company in New Mexico, or Ariel Greenwood, who's also based in New Mexico. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Amber. And next we'll be turning it over to Katerina Owen. Katerina, are you with us?
Yes, I'm right here. Let me just open my
Wonderful.
screen.
Time is up.
All right. Do you guys see the screen correctly?
Yes, we can see the screen.
Perfect. Okay, well, thank you so much for having us. Our presentation is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to start us off, then I'm going to pass it on to Leon and then Jonathan. And it's not going to be a scientific presentation like Brandon. It's going to be more like community level. And well, thank you for having us and giving us the chance to talk a little bit about what's going on in our area. I'll just say who we are. The Satu Renewable Resources Board is the main instrument of wildlife management in the Satu settlement area in the Northwest Territories in Canada. We were established under the Satu, Dene, and Métis Comprehensive Link Claim Agreement to ensure that wildlife habitat and harvesting rights are maintained in a way that respect the Dene and Métis values and knowledge. So to say that our role is to make decisions and provide recommendations on wildlife, conservation, research, and at the same time, we are mandated to work very closely with our Indigenous partners. Oops. Oh, this is the end of my presentation. Let me go to the beginning. Okay. This is just a map to put us in a map. So this is where we are right here in the middle of the Northwest Territories. This is the Satu region. So very close to Alaska, where Brandon presented earlier. We had a hard time deciding what to talk about in regards to changes in seasonality and how our region is being impacted. But we narrowed down to ice patches, permafrost, and spring harvest. And now I'm going to pass it on to Leon, and I'll let him introduce himself and all that. Just bear with me because we'll have to pass the laptop around.
Hello, my name is Leon Andrew. I'm from the Northwest Territory, Canada, up there in Norman Wells area. I'm sure some of you have heard about Great Bear Lake. We live right next to Great Bear Lake on Mackenzie River. I'm a member of the Mountain Dene along west of Tulita, where I'm from. We have a high mountain range. And I want to put a little bit of a background of the people I'm from. The Mountain Dene, there are spiritual drummers. As you see them in the picture there, we're guided by the spiritual drummers, and we still do it today. One of the things that have been passed down for us is that they talk about polar reversal. And I think we find ourselves today in those kind of mode. Meaning like the water once was cold, now it's no longer going to be cold. Maybe it'll be warmer. So that's where I'm at. I'm going to start from that, and maybe I can go to the next slide and go to the area of the mountain people. This is an ice patch that was there back in 2005 area. The elevation of the mountain, this ice patches throughout the Mackenzie in our research area about ice patches that we have done. It's in our district, like Katerina talked about. So when this kind of ice patches, our people used to hunt on it. They use it for caribou hunting. Caribou go to those ice patches. There's about 12 of them, 10 of them that we've been monitoring. So this here, how our hunters would use these places to come over the top, like from the high side, with spears and arrows, and would go after the caribou that were just resting there after they cooling up or whatnot. So this is a story about our mountain Dene people. Our elders, we take them very seriously. One of the things about the ice patch, it provides for caribou. I think somebody talked about food, and caribou for us is something that we live off. And they've been using this ice patch for generations. When we did a little bit of the scientists I was with, we did a little bit of back up, see how old this ice patch may be. It's more than 1,000 years from what I gather from them. It's been sitting there. This is at the elevation of a 6,000 feet area. We have one higher, the main ice patch, what we call Keel Peak. We call it Stube. And that one's the ancient ice from the ancient time. When people talk about ice age, and so on. Anyway, if I may, I can go to the next slide. This is a process of the ice melting over 10 summer. 10 summer, it got smaller. This is another area of the ice patch, but it's right next to the first one you saw. And these are all the ice patches are in the north space. And so the north space, the sun don't get to it that much. But this time, for some reason, it did. And this ice patch has melted in a period of, let's say, less than 10 summer. So why was those ice patches important? You see the dark mud that get left behind. Those are caribou droppings. So you can see they use that ice patch for years and years and years. And like I said, our elders hunt those caribou with spears and arrows that come over the top while the animal were resting. So this something that I don't know, I'm a little bit rushing myself, but why this is important? When you guys talk about climate change, we feel it too. I see that through this one. They've been sitting around over 1,000 years. Within 10 summer they were gone. So if I can, this is the last slide we have. Yeah. Okay. Then I'll go on to, if you still have time, I'll go on talking a little bit more about our people. Our people for thousands of years have to go up back in the mountain, back and forth, walk track from Northwest Territory into the Yukon. And they've been following the caribou a lot. And the caribou used to migrate properly in my mind. But today, I don't know if they do that anymore. There's so there's so much hunters. Sorry about that, guys. Give me a moment. The past little while, there's so much people coming into that area looking for wildlife, caribou, moose, whatnot. So it's too many people tracking that area. The caribou movement have changed a bit in my mind. These ice patches, you can see trails and trails of caribou that used to visit these ice patches. And I mean, they're solid rocks, but they have dug a hole in the ground, but 5, 6 inches like that, just packed. But there's no longer to be. The caribou seem to stationary in different areas. Besides the ice patches are gone. Um, there's another ice patch we found a little further down, but it's still the same elevation. There's just a little piece left. That one's huge, but just a little piece left a couple of years ago. There we found artifacts that dated back 5.5 thousand years old. And that was interesting. So we have a lot of oral history story, and our people talk about changes to come. I don't know how they know this, but they're gone, and here we are experiencing. I want to touch a little bit on the wind too. The wind were here in the north, around Norman Walls, Satu region. We get all our wind coming from the Arctic Ocean, meaning like Inuvik down that area, and it blows down towards Edmonton, the South Alberta Lake. And it's been very strong. But then all of a sudden, since 2000 and no, 1990, 1991 era, things have changed for us. Our elders talk about the moon. The moon was acting up. So they were telling me, what, oh, don't you see that? I said, no. But yeah, there's something going on. Ever since the south wind started to come up our way from the south blowing towards Norman Wells or up towards Mackenzie and into the Arctic. And they blew in a lot of hot air. And I think that helped, that didn't help the ice patches. It's melted away. So I'll leave it at that. It didn't take long, just 10 years. Okay, what's it?
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Jonathan Akalaya. I work for the Satu Renewable Resources Board. I'm the research coordinator. I live in Toledo. Today, I want to talk about permafrost and what impacts it has in the Satu region. Right now, the two pictures that you are seeing right now, the one on the left is a permafrost sump. These are both permafrost sumps. The one on the left is located across in the mountains south of Toledo. It's an area where we have where our people go for caribou, moose, and fish. It's an area where Stewart Lake and Cake Lake. Um, that's where the mountain people go up and harvest caribou and harvest fish and wildlife. And right now, we have just put a trail camera there last year. We are in the process of monitoring the permafrost and not only the permafrost, but the sumps, the oil sumps. Right now, we are monitoring what impacts it has on wildlife and what wildlife are going into these sumps. I believe the one on the left was done in the 90s, and the one on the right was done before the 90s. As you can see, there's still stuff there that hasn't been picked up yet. And why it matters is because when the permafrost thaws, it causes erosions on the land, and water quality isn't as great when that happens. And on the pipeline right now, we do have erosions on the pipeline as well in some certain areas. And for the sumps, it's not great because right now climate change is in effect, and when we have forest fires coming to our region, it opens up the land, and from right then and there, it creates more permafrost. It opens the land, and permafrost thaws out more faster than it normally should, and it drops chemicals and it releases into the environment, and it causes infrastructure damage in our community right now in Toledo. We have some houses that are shifting, and not only in Toledo, but out on the land where our people have cabins and camps and stuff like that. We have cabins shifting as well. And now we're talking about spring harvest. This picture here is located on the map. There's a location called Brackett Lake. To our people have been calling it Willow Lake since as far as I can remember. Um, we come here every year in the spring season to harvest ducks, geese, and swans, migrational birds. This picture here was taken last year, May 16. Because climate change is happening. Our spring season it's always early or it's always late, or it's always early and it's always late. Last year that this has been May 16 has been this river here is already thawed out, and we're using boats by this time, but because of climate change, everything was still frozen out there for us. And Willow Lake is being used by a lot of people in the Satu region and Toledo region in the spring seasons. And right now, because of climate change, we have it's hard for us to come up there because of forest fires, landslides on the creeks and the rivers. So it's not giving us enough water to get up there in the summers. And these are the pictures of the geese, the swan, and the bear. Um, and these pictures here were taken last year as well. As you can see two swans and the geese there as well. Every year we have black bears come out early in the May after everything starts to warm up. But this year the bears were coming out a little bit late because of the late spring we've had. Um, and the swans too, we've normally seen more swans in this time of the year, but because of climate change and everything with the weather, it kind of gave us a late season. Yeah, so if there's any questions that you guys have for either myself, Leon, or Katerina, we're here to answer them. I want to say thank you to everybody and all the presenters that have presented. Masicho.
Thank you so much for that, Jonathan, Leon, and Katerina. Much appreciate you sharing your experiences. And please, to reminders to the audience, please drop questions in the chat. We should still have 5 minutes or so at the end for questions. And next, we want to turn it over to Francia. And Karina, if you want to pull up slides for Francia.
Muchas gracias, gracias por el
Thank you
espacio,
so
por la
much. Thank you for the
invitación.
space, for
Es
inviting
muy
me.
positivo
And it
que
is
estas
very
comunidades estemos
positive that these
platicando de los
communities are
impactos
now
de
talking
los
about the
ciclos
impacts of
estacionales
the
en estos días que hay
changing
que hablar
seasonal
del clima,
cycles
de cómo lo
on
estamos
these days in which we are going to
viviendo,
talk about
pues
the weather and how
estamos
we are
pues en estos días de
experiencing
COP.
it
Entonces, pues
because we are
toca
in
también
these
hablar
COP
de
days.
cómo
And
como
so it is
comunidades
important to talk
estamos
about how,
viviendo,
as communities,
enfrentando,
we are
acompañando, y
facing
ha
and
sido muy
accompanying,
nutritivo escuchar
and it's
a
been
todos y todas
very
las ponentes con sus
fruitful
aportaciones
to
desde
listen to
estos tres
all
países en las
speakers
comunidades.
with their
Nosotros también
contributions from
estamos
these
como
three
Consejo
different
Civil
countries.
Mexicano para
We
la
are
Silvicultura
the
Sostenible,
Sustainable
acompañando a esas
Silviculture
comunidades que
Mexican Civil
responden en
Council
estos
that
territorios y
to
responden
provide
con
support to
pues
communities.
gobernanza comunitaria,
And we
urbanismo
provide
integral del
support with
paisaje. Siguiente, por
a
favor.
comprehensive management of landscapes.
Como lo han comentado
As it has
compañeros
been mentioned
previamente,
by other
de exacto,
colleagues
pues es que los
before,
ciclos
the challenge is that
están
the
alterados, no
cycles
se
are
pueden
being
observar como una
impacted.
progresividad,
We
son muy
cannot see
erráticos. En el
their
centro del
progress.
país
And in
venimos
the center of the country, we
un
have
ciclo de sequías
a
que también se
drought
exacerba en el
cycle
norte
that is
y
more
este año tenemos un exceso
significant in the
de
north, and we
lluvias
have an
que
excess of
afortunadamente han
rain
sido
in this
manejables en
year
algunas
that have
partes, en
been
otras pues se
manageable in
presentan
some
con
parts,
desastres
and in other
naturales
parts
que se
we
convierten en
have
tragedias humanas.
natural disasters that
En
become
nuestro territorio lo
human
vemos, siguiente
tragedies.
por favor,
We have seen that in our territory
lo
too.
vemos
We
expresado en
have
el
it
centro del
seen
país
expressed in
que
the
tiene
center
un
of
alto
the
valor
country
socioambiental a partir
with
de
a
su
high
provisión de agua.
social and
Estamos en
environmental
la cuenca
value.
Manalco-Valles de
Regarding
Bravo,
water
que es
provision,
un
we are in the
territorio
basin of a
de cerca de 61,000
Guatemala, which is a
hectáreas
territory
que
of
con las actividades
60,000 hectares
forestales
that,
y
due to
comunitarias
forestry
abastece,
activities, it
nutre los
supplies the
mantos que van hacia el sistema Cutzamala que
aquifers that go to
alimenta
the
a la Ciudad de México
Guatemala system
y a la
that
zona
feeds
conurbada de la
Mexico
Ciudad de
City
México.
and the
Es un
urban
corredor
area
biológico que
near
conecta
Mexico. It is
áreas
a
naturales
biological
protegidas como la
corridor
reserva de
that
Toluca,
connects
como el bosque de
protected
Goyeneche,
areas
como la
such as
reserva de la
Toluca's
mariposa monarca
Nevado de
y
Toluca,
entonces pues es un
the
reservorio
Bosencheve National
de
Park, and the
biodiversidad altamente importante y pues
Butterfly
es un
Biosphere
territorio
Reserve.
forestal
So it is a
que
forestal
afortunadamente está
territory that
logrando sostener
fortunately
o
it's been
incrementar en
able to
impulsos
sustain
su
or to increase at
masa
certain point
forestal.
at
Y esto
forestal
hace que
mass.
se
And that
capture
makes
alrededor de 200 toneladas de dióxido de carbono al año.
approximately
Aquí se asientan
200,000
comunidades
tons of carbon
originarias,
being captured.
Mazahua,
We have
Otomí, Nahua,
ordinary
y
or
la última
native
comunidad de
towns such as
Matlatzintla,
the
en
Masawa,
el
Otomi,
municipio
and Nahua,
de
and
Temascaltepec. Siguiente, por
Matsantinka
favor.
community
Los
in
impactos de estos
Tamalsepec.
cambios
The impacts of
erráticos
these
en los
climate
ciclos, pues
changes
como ya
in
lo han comentado, lo
cycles,
vemos en lluvias que
as
erosionan
it
los
was
suelos
mentioned, we
fértiles,
have seen
como
it with
comentaba la
rain
compañera
that
Yucatán,
erodes
destruyen
fertile
cosechas,
land that
y las lluvias
destroy
tardías
crops
que
or
también
late
a la hora de
rains
cosechar
that when
se pudre
harvesting
la cosecha porque
uh,
pues llegan
crops
en este momento, por
are
ejemplo,
get
está
rotten
cayendo una lluvia
because
cuando es momento de cosechar y
probably there's
entonces
a
pueden
rain when
tener
it is a
impactos
moment it's a
pues sobre el
moment to
almacén o
harvest, and
sobre
this could
el
have an
acervo
impact on
de maíces que
storaging of
alimentan
maize
pues a
that
las
feed
familias
uh,
campesinas, mayor
farmers'
incidencia de
families,
incendios,
more fires.
y en la parte de las respuestas, pues
And
vamos a ver
regarding responses,
los
we
contrastes
have
de cómo
seen
se responde a los
contrasts
incendios.
about how
Naturalmente,
to
mayor plagas, que
respond to
también
fires
tiene
that
que ver pues
are
con los
related
procesos de
to
producción
the
forestales, que
production
a veces
forestal
es más
processes that are
factible
more
que caiga una
that
plaga
sometimes
cuando
it is more
tenemos
feasible
un
to have a
monocultivo y
pest
no
when we have a
protegemos una
mono
diversidad
agriculture and
forestal
we
o
do not
una
promote
diversidad nativa, ¿no?
forestal
Siguiente, por favor.
diversity. Next one, please.
Pues la respuesta
The
es,
strategy or the
como ya
response,
lo han compartido
as it
compañeras,
was
compañeros,
mentioned
son las
by some of my
soluciones,
colleagues,
sí,
are
originadas en
the
la naturaleza, pero
solutions
basadas en
based
las
on nature, but
comunidades.
especially
Estas
those based on
comunidades
communities.
que
These
cabe
communities,
recordar
it is
para
important
la
to
audiencia
recall
mexicana
for
y
a
también para
Mexican
los otros
audience and for
compañeros de países de
other
Estados Unidos
colleagues
y de
from
Canadá.
US
En
and
México
Canada
hubo
that in
reparto
Mexico
agrario
there
y
was
este reparto agrario distribuyó
an
en
agricultural
ejidos y comunidades gran parte
distribution,
del territorio
and
y
this
entonces
divided the
bajo
territory in
estos
agricultural lands,
entendimientos
and
comunitarios
so
se
within
tienen
these
procesos de
communitary
gobierno
understandings, there are
y
some
de manejo de los
agreements. There
bosques
is a way
y
to
de
manage
pues una
forests
vida
and
comunitaria y campesina
to have
pues que es
a
posible gracias a que hay esa
farmer
tenencia de la tierra,
community
si no
thanks
estaríamos
to
hablando de
these
territorios con
land rent. If
mayor
not, we will
migración.
be
Esta
having
gobernanza
more
comunitaria
migration. This
pues
communitary
tiene sus
governance
espacios de asamblea,
has
sus
its
propias
own
normativas,
spaces for
reglamentos que
assemblies,
son
their
pues sus reglas
regulations,
las que los
which
rigen
are
y también pues aquí se
the
asientan estas
the
comunidades
rules
indígenas.
they follow.
Son estos guardianes locales los
They
primeros
we
en
have
monitorear,
these
en tener
local
esta
guardians are the
práctica que
ones
va
that
pues desde los ancestros en la
monitor
observación, pero que va acompañado
and
también
observe
de monitoreos pues que
and
proponemos
protect
las
the
organizaciones o las asociaciones
lands
para saber cómo responder a
that
estas
organizations
consecuencias
propose in order
ambientales.
to face
La
these
resiliencia también se
environmental
ancla en esta
consequences.
parte de la soberanía
Resilience is
alimentaria
also
y el
anchored
comercio
in
justo,
food sovereignty
propiciando
and
pues los
free,
procesos de
fair trade
producción de
by
autoconsumo. Y pues como lo decía, el
promoting
monitoreo participativo de
a
toda la
fair
comunidad, porque
consumption
hay un
as well as
arraigo, hay una
participative
pertenencia al
monitoring,
bosque, a la
because people
parcela,
own
al
the
territorio.
forest, the
Siguiente, por favor.
plot, and the territory.
Nosotros lo hacemos a
We
través
do
de un
this through
vehículo
a
que
vehicle, through a
diseñamos
mean,
al principio de
a
nuestra
process that we
intervención en
designed
este
at the
territorio.
beginning of our
Tenemos
intervention in this
cerca de 15
territory. We
años
have
en esta cuenca
approximately
Manalco Valle
15
de
years
Bravo
in this Amanalco
y se
Valle de
generó
Bravo basin,
también con las comunidades
and this
el
was
pago por servicios
developed
ambientales para
together
el
with
manejo integrado
communities
del
to
territorio,
pay
que es un modelo de PCA
a PCA model that is active. It is not a payment to preserve, but acknowledging that this occupation of communities are those, and that those communities are the ones that have seeded the plot and that have keep biodiversity. So this is a payment to for environmental services that we have at different scales. The first one is the agricultural one. We work with farmer families, and the second one is with a farmer course to practice forestry or for firewalls, brigades, etc. To having, I mean, doing the best management practices of the forest, and for a water sustainability, we accompany communities to recover springs or to supply water to communities. And this is instrumented through, especially in the agricultural side of it, with annual plans that go from participation in planning from the community. So with their observation, they can tell us where is necessary to intervene with natural resource management as well as governance matters that may facilitate or may strengthen their governance local tools in the assemblies and the execution of their agreements, and also in accompanying sustainable projects. This planning cycle, presenting it to the assembly, executing the ideas, and being accountable from the assembly and makes having an assessment makes a cycle that can be done consequently, but with the proper observation mechanisms to know where it is necessary to make adjustments.
Also, in this territory where the ownership is through ejidos and communities, it is much more focused on men. So it is important to give further steps to encourage female leadership. Only 21% of the social ownership is on the hands of women, but we have to work with the other part of women are not owners of the land. So we have this project with the CEC, which was focused on rural women leaders and adaptation to climate change. And that made us summarize the experiences we had before to be able to identify the transforming gender, not only engagement or equity, but also going to the next level, which is engagement of women in their territory. So this was strengthened at three different scales. Rural women leaders. It is a methodology that goes from farmer to farmer, where we trained promoters that accompany families in other territories for organic agriculture in this area. The next one was the creation of Women's Fire Brigade against forest fires. The first women brigade with 31 women involved, and they are currently participating in different institutional cells because the hero owners are the first respondents when there is a forest fire. And the second level resources called the Tierra Viva is a savings bank that helps them with the creation of economic resilience to withstand crop losses due to climate events.
Entonces, en la práctica,
So
en el
in
modelo de
practice,
adaptación en la
in the
parcela, tenemos
adaptation
nuestro
model
programa
for the
cero
parcel or plot of
deslaves, que
land,
es de un
we have
año,
a
y en el
zero
segundo año pasamos a la etapa de
landslides,
agricultura
year one, and then
orgánica,
we have the
que son
organic
estas animadoras
agriculture.
campesinas que
We have
generan
this
modelo de
agri
acompañamiento familiar
women
con diferentes prácticas
farmers that
agroecológicas que
have
están dando
different
la respuesta
agroecological
inmediata y
practices
a
that
través de la
give an
observación de las
immediate
familias y de
response
las
through
comunidades
the
a las
observation of the
condiciones
families and
ambientales.
communities
Algunas
for
de
the
las prácticas
environmental
que se
conditions. Some
promueven
of the
son los
practices that
canales de
are promoted
infiltración, las
are
barreras
the
vivas, y
infiltration
con eso se
channels,
está
the live
generando una
barriers, and
retención del
with that,
suelo, se
we
evita
are
la
retaining the
erosión.
soil.
Y en la
We
parte de la nutrición del
Francia,
prevent
suelo,
soil erosion
sí,
from
apologies to
happening.
interrupt. One more minute, please.
1 minuto. Gracias. Se genera, pues,
Through this,
prácticas con
we can create
biofertilizantes, composta
practices
y
with
demás. Siguiente, por favor.
biofertilizers, compost, and other things. Next, please.
Estamos hablando de que se evitan
We're
alrededor de
saying that
14.500 toneladas de suelo
the
con
loss
estas
of
prácticas. Siguiente, por
14,500
favor.
tons of soils is prevented annually with these
Aquí
practices.
hay un esquema
Here you
comparativo
can
de
see
este
a
modelo de
comparison
agricultura
of
en
this
una etapa de
agricultural
transición
model in a
de
transition
la
stage
agricultura convencional,
from
que lo
conventional
dejaré más bien para que cada quien
agriculture.
lo revise en cada
Please
uno de los
go
rubros.
over
Es muy
this
favorable
slide
la implementación de estas
after my
prácticas,
presentation.
que son una medida de
These
adaptación
practices
a la
are
parte de
very
los
much
cambios
feasible
ambientales. Siguiente, por
and can
favor.
help adapt to
Y
climate
bueno,
change.
pues solo resaltar
And
algunos de los
I would like to
resultados en
highlight
estas
some of
respuestas de las
the
comunidades.
outcomes.
Son 35
We
comunidades que
have
están gestionando
35
activamente
communities
más
that
de
are
55
actively
mil
managing
hectáreas
more than
bajo manejo forestal mejorado
55,000
en
hectares
todas las
through
prácticas, y han podido escalar
improved
incluso
forest
24
management, and they
proyectos de
have been
captura
able
de
to
carbono,
scale up
y hemos
24
podido
carbon capture
mantener,
projects, and we have been
recuperar y
able
distribuir
to keep
76
and
manantiales
recover
que tienen
76
un
springs
arraigo, una
that have
pertenencia comunitaria, además de
a
hacer saneamiento
community
de
origin,
agua.
and
Siguiente, por
also they
favor.
help provide
Lo
water.
más importante,
The
donde
most
queremos poner el
important thing
foco, es
is
el
as
monitoreo
follows:
participativo con indicadores, que esto es lo que les va a
monitoring
arrojar
through
las señales a las
indicators
comunidades de
it
cómo están los
will
tiempos
help communities
anteriores
know
inmediatos para poder
how the
hacer
immediate
acciones de remedición en la siguiente etapa de
weather
adaptación si es
was to
necesario.
be
Siguiente,
able to
por
make
favor.
changes to the next season
Y
if
como
necessary.
parte final, pues, el modelo de
As
gobernanza
I mean,
comunitaria de la
the community governance
autodeterminación
model with
con un
and
impacto hídrico
self-determination as
que ha
an
evitado estas
a,
toneladas perdidas de suelo
is a
y el
significant
liderazgo
water
transformador
impact model.
apuntan
It's a
al qué
transformative
hacer con
leadership and
estas
help us know
soluciones
what to
basadas
do
en
with
las
these
comunidades. Estamos
community-based
disponibles para
solutions.
respuestas a
So
cualquier
please
pregunta.
let us
Gracias.
know if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Francia. And we have just a few minutes left for questions from the audience to all of our panelists. And so I saw that we have 3 questions that are actually for Amber. There's a lot of interest in the dams. So I'm going to summarize them. The questions are, so how long have the dams been in place, and what are some of the impacts that you've seen? And also, are there any downstream, maybe unintended effects of the dams?
Yeah, those are really good questions. So we have had, let me think here. I would say we started putting them in 2020, and it was actually the World Wildlife Fund works with a group of young people, and they traveled around the state of Montana. And so they lived on our ranch for 10 days. And so they were the leaders of the project. And then myself and my family would come in and support their efforts. The waterways that we are putting in analogs, they are basically dry unless there is rain. Now, they are putting in dams on year-round streams and creeks. That's a different situation I can't speak to very well, but at least where we are based, we did not have to seek any type of permissions to put in the dams. And the tallest one is about mid thigh, if that helps, like midway up the leg. Michaela, was there another question I'm not answering in there?
Was there any unintended consequences potentially?
You know, one of the things we were concerned about was the yearling type cattle, especially. We assumed they would go in and rub and mess with them. We haven't seen that effect, which is surprising because especially yearlings are very curious and do like to mess things up that you try to put in place. But for some reason, with those natural dams, we're not having that. And I would say the effects we have seen so far have all just been very positive. So, across the hottest part of the summer, when we're out moving cattle, rotating cattle to a new pasture, we always try to go down and take photos. We have also had folks from the World Wildlife Team fly a drone so they can get a very high aerial view of what is going on. And basically, all of those areas are maintaining green. So when everything else on the ranch is pretty well brown by mid to end of June, those areas are staying green. And you can see that from those drone videos. And then, of course, just in person with my phone. So to us, it's been very positive. And you'll see pollinators. So we've been having a lot of wildflowers pop up. And so you'll see all kinds of native bees and birds. There's a lot of butterflies that show up. And you just step one bench up where it's dry, and all of that activity stops.
Well, thank you for that. So it sounds like there are a lot of very positive impacts. And then, Karina, did you want to ask the question that we have in Spanish?
Sí, gracias,
Español.
Micaela. Tenemos
Yes,
una
Micaela, thank you. We have a question in Spanish,
y es la siguiente.
and the question
¿Qué
is as
factores
follows.
consideran que
What
influyen
factors do
más
you
y que
consider
provocan
that
la erosión de
influence the
los
most
suelos?
and that
¿Y
provoke the
cómo se considera la
soil
transición
erosion? And how do
ecológica
you
en su
consider the
implementación?
agroecological transition in its implementation?
Yes, and I think that this question is specific to Mexico. So maybe Carolina or Francia, if you could answer.
Si quieren, yo puedo empezar.
Maybe I can start.
Estoy teniendo problemas con él. No se ha abierto mi video, ¿verdad? Ya. Sí, depende mucho de los tipos de suelo.
It
México tiene
depends
una
on
gran
the
diversidad
type
de
of
suelos
soils.
y depende del tipo
Mexico
de
has
suelo
a
hay
great
diferentes
variety of
tipos de
soils.
erosión
So there are different types of
hídrica o
erosions.
eólica. So, hay zonas
The erosion can
en
be
el
due to
sureste
the wind,
mexicano que la
due to
erosión es más
water.
fuerte,
There
pero
are
debido a
certain
estos
regions of
cambios
Mexico where the wind
climáticos que
erosion is
existen,
harder,
de alguna manera u otra las
but
dos están presentes, ¿no?
because of climate change,
Lluvia
both types of
torrencial puede provocar una
erosions
fuerte
are
erosión
present. Torrential rainfall can create a great soil erosion.
y por ejemplo los
And
vientos,
for example,
pues hay todo un efecto
when
ahí eólico
has
importante.
also
Entonces,
a
yo creo que
significant
es más el hecho de
negative
la
impact.
combinación de las
So
dos
it
y
is a
cómo se ponen
combination of both,
en
or
temporadas
how
puntuales lo que
they
afecta, ¿no?
happen in
La erosión
specific
eólica
seasons.
tiene
The
impactos
wind
muy fuertes
erosion has
en días
great
de sequía,
impact in
en
a
terrenos que
drought
están
season,
totalmente
in
descubiertos, ¿no?
a land
Entonces,
which is
de alguna manera
completely
otras han
uncovered.
promovido prácticas
So
que
some
permiten
people have promoted some
la tierra
practices
abierta
to cover
como dejar residuos
the
de cosecha
soil,
o como
such as
utilizar
having
abonos
a
verdes, ¿no?
harvest
Tiene que ver mucho con
debris
esta
or
asociación de lo
other
que es
materials.
la
This
afectación ecológica, ¿no?
has to do with ecological succession, not leaving the soil naked, but covering with vegetation. And this vegetation can be an induced vegetation, such as the harvest remains, or acaguales, which are secondary plants from all these ecological succession. Maybe Francia has other things to say. Well, I fully agree. I would just like to add that the ecological transition has to be in different stages with the disintoxication practices of the ecosystems and soils so that the practices can provide better outcomes. Farming or forest practices to eliminate defragmentation of the territory and create more biological corridors that can help the soil.
Great. Thank you so much. And then I think, Brendan, do you have a question for the other panelists? Oh, okay. No, great. Okay, so I actually have a question for both Brendan and then Katerina, Jonathan, and Leon, which is that we saw from the examples from the continental US and Mexico that communities are having to innovate quite a bit to adapt to the changing climate. And so do you have examples from the regions that you work in for ways that communities are innovating?
Yeah, just real quickly, people in the Arctic communities on the coast of Alaska are um, innovating by using different kinds of boats to get to their prey. They're changing their seasonality of their harvests. They're I think the thing that really stands out is that they are tracking the change in using their kind of observations of weather and then just reorienting the time of year that they work. The other thing that they're doing a lot of work on is working with youth in the communities to, um, you know, kind of bring forward traditional values, but in a modern context. And this particularly has to do with hunting values and that sort of thing.
Great, thank you so much. And Leon? Oh, I think actually you're muted. Oh, there we go.
Thank you. Well, for the Satu, uh, there is a lot of changes due to the water. I think we talked about water a little bit there. I heard someone talk about water. Yeah, we have the same problem within Mackenzie River itself. A lot of the water drainage from the mountain area are also going down a bit. Um, it used to be that every spring, like in July 1st, we get high water, but lately, since 2000, things have changed. And so for people to go fishing is a different method got to be used. But now we still got water, so they're still using the same method, but they're for this time of year, like November, the ice freezes and then people go out fishing, but there's no ice there now out there yet to go fishing. So yeah, they have to find ways to going forward, I guess. I should say that in terms of hunting, our people like to go on the land too, but they're the same thing. So the best time for them now is to go in looking for wildlife is during the midwinter. That would be like February, March, January, in those time frame. Right now, there's hardly any snow to go anywhere here in the north. Maybe my colleagues got something to say.
Yeah, we hear over and over again that people have to change their traditional harvesting territory to just be able to access the wildlife. And also there's and even changing the trails, right? How they get there. Like everything is they're adapting and changing as needed to be able to access the wildlife. Do you want to say something, Jonathan?
Yeah, all these presentations are really great. Like what the colleagues are saying, right now we are just in the process of adapting to the climate change, going out to the seasonal hunting areas. They aren't the same as they were in the past. So now we are in the process of slowly adapting to that change. That's it.
One other thing happening too in the north, we get a lot of growth from willows. That too come up really fast all over the north. So a lot of new growth, but fire too, burning all their woods. Yeah, it's different. I hope
Thank
that
you.
helps.
Yes, very much so. Thank you so much, Brendan.
Yeah, I should have mentioned that on St. Lawrence Island, which is depended very heavily on walruses, they have just built a reindeer processing plant and a halibut processing plant. And they've had reindeer on the island introduced over 100 years ago, had been largely feral, but now they're herding them again. And but the economics are important of having a processing plant. And so they've, with grant funding, built a processing plant. At the same time, they've diversified into uh, semi-commercially harvesting halibut. This is really important because they're needing to replace a pure subsistence life with a mixed economy.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And thank you to all of our speakers for staying an extra 10 minutes. I know that the comments from the audience, people greatly enjoyed this. We will be putting up the recording in all three languages on our website. And once again, just thank you for sharing.
Thank you.